Alright guys, so today we're going to be doing something very cool. So, I have bigger news for you. So, after this video, I don't want to spoil it, so watch this channel for that. So this is the Marshall DSL1, regarding guitar. I got big news regarding guitar gear. So, Marshall DSL1, and then this right here is the MX112 Cabinet. Okay? So, watch that video where I said that you benefit a lot from using this cabinet because it's a Marshall cabinet on a Marshall head. So you get a sound that's closer to what sounds like a Marshall. If you put this head with just a normal speaker, it doesn't sound like a Marshall because the construction of the speaker, right, is what shapes the sound. So what I'm going to do today is that I'm going to swap out the speaker with a Heritage speaker. Okay? So before we do that, this is what the speaker sounds like. This is a 7080. So this is going to be a long video. Right? If you want to play rhythm, I just played this for the... I played it on the reels. Right? Okay, so it sounds pretty good, right? So there's a lot of things we could talk about, really. So some of the things that, you have to kind of read between what I'm saying. So one of the things is that amplifiers usually, this sounds very good to me right here, right? So one of the things that we need to understand is that amplifiers sound great at this volume. This is in the 1 watt mode, not even at half. If I put this to the other day I turned it up to 1. If I turn it up to 2, the cops will be here. That's how loud this amp is, right? So what happens is as you turn it up, sometimes it starts to sound more like shit. So right now, today, because temperature has to do a lot with it because it's analog, right? The humidity and the weather, right? Everything. The humidity and the strings, the way I play. So each day it's almost like a different sound. And I usually have this over here. Now it's over here. So anyway, I could talk about this all day long, but anyway, you have an EQ here. So I'm going to talk about the sound now. You have an EQ here that basically shapes the mids, the bass, and the treble, right? However, a lot of the sound is coming from the speaker, right? So when we talked about, remember, I'm a singer, standalone singer. Remember we talked about mics and how mics have a frequency response, right? For example, right? So a mic could have a frequency response like that. So what this means is that certain frequencies are boosted, certain frequencies are attenuated. Okay? Right? So maybe I should put this here. We're going back to my electrical engineering days. I'm actually an electrical engineer from San Jose State. I graduated from San Jose State. But I never found a job in EE because EE stands for electrical engineering. Never found a job in EE because, those type of jobs are typically, I hate to say it, but not available. Let's just put it that way. And it's really hard to get into, so I got into data science and AI. But anyway, frequency, right? Amplitude. So amplitude is the height. So you can see here that as the frequency goes this way, some frequencies are higher, some frequencies are lower. So what the microphone does is that it amplifies certain frequencies and then it attenuates, brings down certain frequencies. This is, generally this is called different terms. You can think of this as a frequency response as a more engineering term that only engineers understand, right? So for the general public, you can also think about this as a characteristic curve. So this curve makes the SM58 sound like what it does. So if we change this curve by boosting certain other frequencies, or changing the shape of this curve, you change the shape of the sound. The other way to think about this is simply just EQ, right? Think about a 12-band EQ, and then think about it as like this is the bass frequencies, right? And then this is like the treble frequencies, and then if you adjust it, you get this curve. So simply just as like a 10-band EQ or a 12-band EQ, right? So EQ shapes sound. Frequency response is just basically just how it responds. It's the shape of the curve, or it's the characteristic curve. So think about this for the rest of this conversation. I'll use the phrase a characteristic curve. That means that this gives you the character of the sound you're hearing, right? So with this right here, with this EQ, as I talked about 10-band EQ, here, this is not 10-band, this is just, bass, middle, and treble, more of like a parametric EQ, right? So with this EQ, what you can do is that you can basically shape this. This is what you're doing. But you don't have control over every single frequency. You're sort of just sweeping through, like, sort of like maybe bass is like, probably from like, here to here or something like that, and then the mids are there, and then, so this is like each knob represents a band of frequencies, right? So I started out as a bass player. My bass used to have like a built-in, EQ, like a 6-band EQ, which was kind of cool. A PV head. I sold all that stuff because I just have too much junk to carry around and shit, So anyway, this amp, the characteristic curve, you can define it by this EQ, correct? However, there's only so much you can do, right? If this were true, then I could just make this sound like a JCM, or I could make this sound like a very expensive Marshall. So obviously there's other stuff here that we don't have. So adjusting just the bass, treble, and middle alone is only going to take you so far, because you have like, the characteristic of this DSL sound, which is which is defined by the circuit, right? And then you have like a presence knob, which this doesn't have, which is kind of like an overall sweep of the sound, right? This is what this doesn't have. Higher end amps have that. So anyway, the only takeaway here is that, pretty simple concept, right? Each amp has its own characteristic curve. We can think about it as a voicing. So now I will use the word voicing, right? This head has its own voice. Technically, it's its own frequency response. Technically, it's its own characteristic curve, right? But we'll just say voicing from now on, okay? So this has a specific voicing. But there's only so much you can do, because this speaker is what makes the sound. So you're adjusting the voicing on top of the speaker. So this is a fixed thing. This has a characteristic voicing. A very important concept, right? You can't control it all here. The speakers are important because the speaker has a characteristic voicing. Hence, each speaker sounds different. So this speaker, for example, might be better. What's wrong with this thing? Alright, it's not working. I think the battery's dead. What the fuck? Alright, anyway, it won't clear up. Or it's clearing up slowly. I think I need to change the battery. Anyway, just keep that in mind. So, this speaker here, this is a 7080, right? The 7080 is a more modern speaker. So this is not going to do what we want to do. So I'm going to swap it out with the Heritage speaker, which has a different characteristic tone, voicing, right? So if you change the speaker, you change the voicing, and then on top of this, you have kind of like control over that. So right now, I'm controlling a 7080 speaker. I'm stuck with that voicing. So there's only so much I can do. So if I change this, right, I'll have better voicing. So to think about this as the fundamental that you're working with. This is the fundamental sound you're working with. And then you can kind of, change this a little bit, which is more like the icing on the cake. So there's only so much we can do, right? Because this is fundamentally a cheap speaker. So 7080 speaker, it only goes for $80. It's kind of a ripoff because this thing costs $300. So they just put an $80 speaker in here, and then this is the engineering of the cabinet that you're paying for. So the engineering of the cabinet means the way they constructed the cabinet, all of that stuff has an effect on the analog sound. This is why if you buy a different cabinet, it's going to sound different, even though the speaker is the same. So we're covering a lot of ground here, just try to follow along. So even if I put this speaker in a different cabinet, this cabinet will sound different because it's constructed acoustically different. And that is, proprietary of Marshall. That's why it's a Marshall cabinet. Okay? So if I take a 7080 and I buy a generic cabinet, it's not going to sound the same as this. Because the way the cabinet, not only the way the speaker, right? The way the cabinet is constructed. The cavities of the cabinet, you know what I mean? The holes in the cabinet. Is it open back or closed back? All these things further shape the voicing. Okay? So the speaker has a voicing. That voicing is modified by how this cabinet is constructed acoustically. How much space is there? Is it really tight? Is it a little bit bigger? Is it have more space for the air to move? Is it open back or closed back? If it's closed back, then the speaker is more tighter. So what we want to do, thrash and stuff like that, we want closed back because we don't want the speaker to vibrate too much. Go back and forth too much. So that's why sometimes when you buy a cabinet, combo, if it's open back, it's not really suited for metal. That's why I said, a head and a closed cabinet is more suited for metal because we want to do, things like this. Right, stuff like that. It sounds pretty good actually. Right now. So I may be making a mistake changing this out. I don't even know if I could yet. I'm going to open up the cabinet next. So I don't want to talk too long because then there's going to be a super long video. So anyway, that's why we're going to change this. This should make a lot of sense because, in summary, this is a fundamental sound that you're working with, that you can't change. Unless you change the speaker, right? This is a fundamental sound. This is the output. This is the analog output that you're hearing. So what you're doing is you're putting an EQ right here on top of this sound. So ultimately, you're sort of limited by how this sounds. Now, this thing can basically, this thing has its own characteristic curve, right? Like we talked about here. Sorry, it's partially erased. It's partially, I need to change the battery on this. Why is it doing this? Anyway, okay. So this thing has its own. This is more suitable for like modern sort of thing, modern metal. So what we want to do is we like the characteristic curve, the voicing of the speaker may not be that good because it's cheap. Now there's a speaker called the V30, which is the vintage 30. That came out in 1983 and later. So if you want to sound like Hell Awaits or Show No Mercy or Kill 'Em All or Peace Sells, right? We're going to do the other Celestion speaker, which we're going to talk about. Okay? I could talk about this all day. There's so much stuff that I've already talked about. So the voicing is different. That one has a little bit more mids, so which makes the mids more present for what we're trying to do, which is like, thrash, right? And then you put your, amp EQ on top of that. Make sense, right? So you're changing the fundamental sound by changing the speaker, in theory, hopefully. So let's see what happens. So I'm gonna read you here what I'm gonna switch to. So remember, this is a 7080 speaker. It's only $80. Now this speaker, G12-65, G12-65 is, what that stands for is that I believe the G stands for greenback, because that's like Celestion makes like hundreds of different speakers. I think they at least there's like 20 popular ones. Each one, that's how they make their business. Any company has a different thing, different kind of speaker with bells and whistles that it keeps putting out to make money, to keep new products coming in. So G12-65, the 12 stands for the 12-inch speaker. Right? 12 means 12 inch. 65 is 65 watts of power handling. So I'm going to read you this. It says G12 standard Celestion designation for a 12-inch speaker. 65 stands for, indicates a 65 watt power rating, offering more headroom and robustness for louder rock-oriented amplification than its predecessors. So this came out, remember the V30, I'm going to switch back. Okay, so the V30 didn't come out till like 1983. So anything after that started using the V30s. But the older stuff used the... So I've done a lot of research on this. So this is what was used for Kill 'Em All. This was what we used for, possibly Peace Sells. Definitely Show No Mercy, Hell Awaits, that kind of stuff, right? So we want to go back to here. The voicing is different. This, kind of boosts the mids already so that we already have a good sound to start with. And then we're building on top of that using this EQ and then pedals and things like that, okay? One other important concept to understand is that the 7080, and I hate to pound on this, but the 7080 is made in China. All right. Now you may ask, well, why didn't you go to the V30? Well, the V30 has an issue. So the vintage 30s came out in '83, and that became the staple for a long time. Right. So vintage 30 is like the sound of the Black Album from Metallica, and then everybody started using vintage 30s. Vintage 30s are really popular for like, nu metal and things like that. Like I said, it's been used since 1983. That became the next generation of speakers that people used. However, the V30 is a Chinese speaker. So there's a lot of YouTube videos. So like I said, I did all my research on this before I was going to buy this, new speaker to put in here. So the V30 nowadays is made in China. So there's a UK-made V30. If you compare the UK-made V30 to the Chinese V30, it's like night and day. Okay, so it's like a complete, even though they're both called V30. So that's why I didn't want to buy the V30, because there's only one place to buy the V30. Out of, the entire internet, there's only one place that offers the V30, and ultimately, I chose the G12-65 because I wanted to go for that early thrash vintage sound. Even though I could have went for the V30 UK made. Remember that, UK made. So the reason this sounds okay but not as good, because this is entirely made in China. So 7080, right? So 7080 cheap speaker. This is a ripoff because this is $300. They just put an $80 speaker and then put a bunch of wood around it. Of course, a patented Marshall cabinet construction, and it's like $80. So what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade the speaker. It cost me $160, and then that cabinet, if you want to buy that or a V30, it's like an $800 cabinet just for 112. So they mint money on this by just switching the speaker to like $160 speaker, because V30 as well is $160, right? So V30 $160. And then they mark it up to $800 just because because they can. So as I said, I chose the 65 because 65 is definitely made in UK, which we're going to verify. Hopefully, we're going to verify that it's it's made in UK. So UK speakers versus Chinese speakers, huge difference, same part difference. For some reason, the 7080 has been pushed to China. The V30 nowadays, if you just go buy a V30, it's been pushed to China. However, supposedly the V30 went back to UK, but it's hard to verify. So they're last year. So they're probably gonna want to sell all the V30s that are made in China. So before we get commercial availability of V30s from the UK, that might be a while. So right now I only found one place, and ultimately I decided, okay, I'm just gonna go with I want to go, with and I heard the V30 versus the G12-65, and the G12-65 just sounded warmer. Right? Well, V30 had like a voicing, the UK V30. Remember, don't confuse. I know it's very confusing. So G12-65 versus UK-made V30 versus Chinese-made V30. I compared all the three. Based on YouTube, I decided to go with the G12-65. All right? So that's the whole entire thing. Ultimately, again, I'll re-summarize because we talk so much. This is a fundamental voicing of your sound. Is the speaker cabinet, the way it's designed, open back, close back, and also what type of speaker is in there. So this speaker is twice as much as 7080. It costs twice as much, it's $160. So hopefully it'll be better. You heard what this sounds like. I just played it for you. So I'll annotate that as a chapter And then towards the end, you can just, if you want to compare it side by side, you can just skip chapters and then see, hopefully we'll install the new one by the end of this video. All right. So I'm going to have to chop it off, and then I'll make like 3 separate videos and then put it all together. But I'm going to do that all right now. I just don't want, to watch everything, because if you watch everything, it's boring. I'm going to take this, put it on the ground, open the back up, and then we'll see what happens, right? So that is the motivation for doing it, because changing the speaker will give you, a drastic, at least in theory, should give you a completely different sound. So basically, I'm upgrading this cabinet from a $300 cabinet to like an $800 cabinet by simply switching out the $80 speaker with a $160 speaker. All right. So again, this is what this sounds like. Oops. This is what this sounds like. Sounds pretty good, actually. Hopefully, it'll sound better and tighter. Sometimes, remember, it's not just all about the tone, but it's also the playability, right? It could help you play better. Hopefully, it's not too subtle. And then I just wasted $160. No, I'm just kidding. So at least you should see the UK versus the Chinese difference. All right? All right. I'm going to stop this here, and then we're going to open the back of the cabinet up and then see what's up in there. We don't know what tools we'll need. Maybe it's soldered. Hopefully it's just a plug and play. All right. So what we're going to do is we have to basically open this up right here. And it's got, a lot of screws here. So it says back here, made in Vietnam. So this cabinet is made in Vietnam. And it should just pop out. The thing with this is that you got to be careful. I'd see this is pretty deep. Jesus. That's a long screw. Because, this stuff here is not made out of real wood. It's made out of like, wood mulch or whatever it is. So if you do this a few times, you're going to basically, the threading will go. So, what does this say? MX112R, 80 watt RMS, 16 ohms. Made in Vietnam, Marshall amplification. Why does it say it has a Marshall amplification and has an England address, but it's made in Vietnam? So, you have to be careful about this stuff, because it'll say England, but doesn't mean it's made in England. So you'll have to basically look at it to make sure that it's just saying the company is in England. Doesn't mean the product is made in England, right? All right, then. There's like 10 other screws. So I'm going to open this up. So I'm going to check back with you once this is open. All right, so I have all the screws out. There's like 12 screws total. It's like four over here, 4 over here, then 2 over here, 2 over here. All right. So the screws are out. I'm gonna see if I can pop this out. Okay. Well, this is not gonna be easy. We're gonna have to. All right. It's stuck in there. Because I don't want to open up my new speaker till we know exactly what's going on in here. And then it's like, how do we get into this? I've never opened up a cabinet before. So the issue is I got the screws out. How do we pop this out? All right, so you're going to have to open this little thing here. This is where the cord goes in, because because I removed all the screws, but it's set in there, so you can't take it out. You need to go in there, grab it, and then pull it out. So it's not going to allow you to do that. They don't want you to get in here, I think. I don't know why. because even if you were to, you know, replace the 7080, right, you'd want to go in there. So I'm gonna guess this will sort of pop up, and then there will be a little space where I can basically, there you go. All right, and then we can get in here. We can put my fingers in here, and then we have to pull it out. All right, it's not easy. I might have to put on gloves here. All right, so I'm gonna put on some garden gloves because this is raw wood. I already fucked up my hand a little bit. So we need to kind of go in here and just kind of, okay, you won't want to move. So I think, let's see. Yeah. Doesn't want to move. All right, guys, so I finally got this open. So this was a bitch to get open. I had to bring my garden gloves, and then I had to basically, you know, bring my hammer because I don't have like a prying tool. So this thing, you have to take all the screws out, and then this is your only access hole here. I had to basically go in here like this and pry it open, and it was really hard. So if you have like a crowbar or something like that, you need that, because the thing is, you know, these things, you know, this is not really wood, but you know, it's probably expanding and contracting with the hot and cold weather, right? So it's cold now, so everything's kind of stiff, right? So I had to basically go in here. You can't pull it out just like this. Sometimes you can, I think, if you're lucky. But here it was just like stuck in there. And I actually thought there was like other screws, and I was like, man, it can't be this tight. So I had to basically, like I said, do all the shit here. That's how tight it was. When I pulled it out, it yanked this whole thing out. This is where the, you know, the connection goes in, and these are basically just two, you know, they're not soldered in there, so they just sort of fit in the speaker. All right, so which is good. So that means we don't have to solder it. So you take this off. Like I said, it was a bitch. Okay, unfortunately you can't see this. Oh, I guess you can see some of it here. Alright, so it looks like it's just got 4 screws. And I'm just going to take them off. Like I said, these are basically, you know, I don't know what they call them, spacer connectors. And then we can just pop the new speaker in, put these connectors in, and that's it, we're good. So the thing here is that this is a 16 ohm. The DSL one will only accept 16 ohm. Okay? For the DSL one, the output impedance is going to be only 16 ohms. It won't take a 8 ohm speaker. So this is a 16 ohm. For the new speaker, since it's Heritage, it's a 15 ohm speaker. So I looked into this. So what they're saying is that back in the day, the 15 ohm is roughly equivalent to 16 ohms. So we should be good for that. What you don't want to do is you don't want to mismatch it with like 8 ohm to 16 ohm. But 15 to 16 is okay. As I said, they're saying, this is what, you know, AI said. I don't know. I just put it in Google and I said, why is this 15 ohms versus this is 16 ohms? It said that 16 is the new 15, although that doesn't make sense. You know, I'm an electrical engineer, but it should be close enough. I think we should be good. Shouldn't be, you know, too much of a difference. So let me go in here. I may not need these gloves anymore. That's pretty much it. So that's the 7080. This is actually called G12P80. Problem is that, see, and it says England, but it's actually China. So you can't go by this label. You have to see, I don't know, let's see, where does it say? Right there, made in China. So don't go by this label. I don't know what the new speaker is going to be. If it's not made in the UK, I'm going to have to return it. So let's go get the new one. Hopefully I can sell this back for, you know, 50 bucks or something. Here's the new speaker, 15 ohm impedance, but it should be okay. So I'm just going to open this up. If it's made in China, that would be a nightmare. So it's kind of weird how you have the same parts, because the schematic should be the exact same thing, but then you know, it makes no sense that, like we talked about the V30, right? Well, if we have to return it, I better keep all the packaging in case we have to return it. The V30, it makes no sense. Ooh, good. Made in the UK. All right, this shit's heavy. This is a little bit heavier. All right. So again, be careful with this stuff here because this is like paper-like material. You can easily poke holes in it and then you'll be done. Now what the Kinks used to do was, that's how they first got the distortion, was that you would just put holes in there. So if you look right over here, on the side, like I told you, it says right there, made in the UK. It says right there, made in the UK. Okay, that's what we want. And like I said, I don't know what the deal is with, how can you have the same parts, same schematic, but if it's made in China, it's made differently. All right, I think that's good enough. It's in there. I should probably test it out just in case. That's it, we're good to go. Now, like I said, I want to make sure it works first before I put this in here. So I think what I'll do is, I mean, I'm sure it's going to work. I kept all the screws here. Way more screws than needed, I think. Probably don't need 12 screws for this. Alright, maybe I'll just test it out and then put it back in, okay? Just to do a sound check real quick. So I'm just going to give it a little test here. Let there be guitar. Let there be rock. I'm using the SG because I didn't want to get the other guitar up. Okay, I'm just going to put everything back in and then we'll do another guitar demo.